I think we're good. So today I just kind of want to cover some topics that I've seen come up with closings where things can go sideways. So this way y'all can know what not to do, but also just some tips to make sure that everything goes smoothly, at least on y'all's side. And then any questions that y'all have for me, please stop me, let me know at any point during this. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. So basically, with a closing transaction, the biggest thing that the closing attorney is going to request from you immediately is going to be the full contract. That's the contract, any amendments, anything else that you have that's signed by your client, send it to us. Don't assume that the other agent is sending it over to us. Go ahead and send it to us. I can't tell you how many times we get a contract and we're missing amendments, we're missing the counter offer, so we don't have a fully executed contract. Just send everything that you've got over to us. The next thing that we're going to ask you immediately is going to be your client's contact information. Phones, email addresses are imperative. They don't send us to us as soon as you possibly can. Reason being is that we immediately, once we get those emails, we send them out seller information forms, buyer information forms, and they are inputting their information to us. Information that they're going to give to us on those forms are going to be typically their social security number. If it's the seller, it's going to indicate whether they're a Georgia resident or not, they're a U.S. citizen. If they've got a payoff, if there's an HOA, if they have a divorce, if it's an estate, anything like that. And that's, of course, very important for us as the closing attorney because we've got to order payoff. We've got to order HOA letters, and we've got to make sure that there's nothing that's a title issue. And if there is, we want to know about it fast. Had a closing not too long ago where the person had just decided they wanted to change their name. But they filled out their information form with the name that showed how they held title. That's fine that they wanted to change their name, but we then need to obtain the court documents that show that they are the same person that's selling the property now. It didn't have anything to do with the marriage or a divorce. They just wanted to change their name. So we have to have documentation for that, and we have to, of course, address that on the title because we're going to need to put language on the deed that says now known as or formerly known as. So it's just a process where we just need to be prepared. Last thing we want is that closing, they show up and they have an ID that has a totally different name, and then we're wondering, who are you, what's going on here?
That's from divorces, right? Because they change the ID card, I mean, the driver's license, but they don't change the social security card and things like that. It happens all the time, yeah.
Yeah, where their passport's not the same, or
Right.
they have an expired ID in a previous name, anything like that. And a lot of times they'll say, well, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal because we have to make sure that that's documented correctly so that it doesn't have any effect on the chain of title. So you're wondering, who in the world is this person? But for divorce, luckily, we'll typically at that point, it'll be pulled with the public records. So we'll be able to see that there was a divorce pending. So we'll know to be on the lookout for that.
Okay.
In the decree, there will typically be something that lists, the maiden name has now been restored, or something to that effect, if they've changed their name back. You have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So if a person buys a house, everything goes well with the purchase and everything. Years later, they get a divorce. Usually with women, the name changes, the last name changes.
Yeah.
What should that person do at that point to, like, if she changes her name and the driver's license and things like that, should she go to the public records and change it there too with the title and stuff?
That's a great question. So she doesn't have to, right then is the answer for that.
But at some point,
Yes, at some point,
right?
and that point can be, if she wants to go ahead and just have it a record with her correct name, ultimately what would happen is for her portion, unless they're deeding one of the spouses off of title, that she would basically be deeding it to herself. It would be going to herself.
Oh, gotcha.
Like Amy Blackman, from Amy Blackman to Amy Blackman, now known as Amy Smanning. So it
Gotcha.
would have something to that effect on the deed, but they wouldn't have to at that time. But all they would need to do is whenever they sold the property, they would just need to immediately provide the documents over to the closing attorney at that time, and they could just handle it at the sale. So just because you change your name doesn't mean that you need to automatically change it on your deed, like you would your driver's license or any kind of government issued ID. You can hold title with your previous name until you sell the property. It's
Yeah,
just a matter of preference.
Right, at the same time though, it's probably better to do it ASAP, not immediately, because what if she dies? and there's changes of names and things, you know what I mean?
And that could definitely complicate it, if
Right.
they, if they got divorced, name change and then they died, that would definitely be a lot of different title boxes we would have to to get it back to the closing table. In that case, and especially for Georgia, there's no, some states will have different transfer taxes if you're reporting a deed to add them to the title. Georgia doesn't have that, it's typically a flat fee. So for Georgia especially, that would not be an issue. So you could definitely go ahead and have your name updated in the county record with your new name just immediately. And then when you sell it, you don't have to worry about providing any documentation. I have seen it occasionally where that happened. For the most part, I've seen people just hold off and do it at closing and they'll.
I imagine nobody's thinking about their stuff.
Yeah.
Take the time off to do it or whatever, you know?
At that point, they've taken the time to do the driver's license, the passport. Usually the last thing I think they're thinking about is, let me get my deed, but at the same time, if they want to do it, that would help their closing go a little bit smoother too.
Sure.
One less box that you have to check on our side.
Same thing with the social security card. It's one thing that they postpone. If you're 40, why change it? If you're not gonna be 65 for a while, why should I change it? You know, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, there's definitely, I mean, I'm guilty, I still have my passport and my maiden name, so,
Gotcha.
it's just one thing I haven't felt like doing just yet, so people do hold off. But for our purposes, we just need, either the marriage, the divorce decree, or any documentation for court papers or anything like that, a marriage certificate of exchange, with stuff like that. But for y'all side as the agent, if they say anything to you along those lines, just let them be aware, you might want to go ahead and start collecting that documentation, because we're gonna ask for it.
Yeah.
And that's for a listing side, if you're representing the seller, I recommend just immediately, if you pull the deed or if you've requested that we pull the deed for you, take a look at who the owner is. And if they're calling themselves something else, have that be a red flag for you and just say, all right, I see that you held title is this, the closing attorney is gonna need some documentation, keep that in mind. Same thing for seller, for if you're representing them, for, the seller, if you see that it's, a parent that has passed away, go ahead and tell them to start getting together their probate documents or whatever documentation they have, their letter of testamentary. Anything that shows who the executor is on behalf of the estate so that they can go ahead and get that together, and have that ready for us. I had some questions actually for a closing that we have coming up, and it's in a state. The executor called and was very curious on why we needed to know if she was married or not, why we needed her social. Make sure for that, they understand it's not talking about the social or the status of the executor. It's talking about the status of the deceased person. So there was a lot of questions on that. And we're of course happy to run through that with them. But of course, for y'all's side, it's good to advise them that ahead of time. Because of course they know y'all, they don't know us in this transaction.
Right.
You represent them as your client. So they're gonna trust you immediately and they don't know us. So we're happy to run through it with them, but that's kind of a good thing to point out. For this particular one, she was wondering why we were asking whether or not she was a Georgia resident. She lives in New Jersey. So at that point, they're gonna show on our seller information sheet, it's gonna have a red flag for us that says you need to do the Georgia withholding. Which I'm sure y'all know if their seller is not a Georgia resident, we go through a list of items and we try to figure out whether or not there's to be withholding. So our check boxes are you a Georgia resident? If you're not, we go down and ask, is it your primary residence or was it the last two of about 5 years with the primary residence? After that, we'll go down and we'll do, we don't actually do it, we typically recommend that they get an accountant involved. We go through and see what the total gain was on the property. So they're gonna wanna know what they purchased it for, any repairs, anything like that that they've done on the property. Typically, we don't give any kind of tax advice or anything, so we want that done as quickly as possible. Our system is pretty good at catching anything like that so that we can alert them very fast. But years ago, I of course had people at the table. Well, how am I supposed to get all these numbers? That's the last thing that you want. If they're at the table trying to figure that out, it's already too late. So at that point, typically we have to do the withholding, submit it to the IRS, and then they have to work through that with them to get any kind of reimbursement.
Yeah.
Same thing for if they're not a US citizen. Of course, there's FERPA that could be applicable, which is 15%, the Georgia withholding is 3%. So you just kind of want to flag that for them, just so it's not a surprise. Last thing you want is, of course, be surprised that's showing up for your seller at the last minute, definitely not at the closing table. But those are different things that when we send out, that's why it's very important that we get the emails and phone numbers for clients as quickly as possible. For buyer side, of course, we need there's a lender, we want their lender contact information. We want to start that process with them, get the title side rolling, so that there's not any delays on that side. Of course, there's a lot of quick turnarounds right now with closing. We have a few 14-day with a lender involved closing, so that's very fast. So we've got to get the ball rolling, get all of our documents in, and make sure we have that going forward. For the seller side, so I know I've talked about this in some of the key meetings, it is crucial that if it is an LLC, a trust, or LLC trust, any entity or an estate, that if that's the seller, they need to understand that the proceeds have to go to the vested owner. So for an estate, if the mom has passed away and the daughter is the executor, the proceeds don't go to the daughter, it goes to the estate. So at that point, you want to make sure that they have an estate account set up. Otherwise, they're not have wire instructions available to fill out as part of their closing documents. And they would also not have a tax EIN number, and we have to have that. So any sale, of course, that takes place, we have to have the 1099 form signed at closing, and that's reported to the IRS that there was a sale of the property. And at that point, if you don't have the tax ID number because they don't have it set up, that's going to be an issue. So it has to be reported. So that's one thing that I've seen. Oh, we have, we'll just take the check that's made payable to the estate. That's fine, but we still have to have that tax ID number, and you have to have that in order to set that account up. So there is a couple extra boxes, and that can take time. If they have an estate planning attorney already in place, they've probably already gotten one and they may not even realize it. So typically what I'll say at that point is get your estate planning attorney to send us all the probate documents, just send them over to us and we'll pick what we need from it. Because otherwise, if we're asking for all these different things, chances are, unless the client is already done the process, they may not have any idea what we were asking for.
Yeah.
They may just say, oh, I've got all these documents, just send it to us. That's a whole lot easier. But for LLC, we had one the other day. The person it was a single member LLC. He doesn't understand why we couldn't just wire it to him individually. It's because the title was held in the LLC.
Right.
So that
It's a different entity.
Has to go to the LLC. But a lot of people they'll set it up for protective reasons. They don't want creditors to have claims on the property. We get it. There's a lot of different reasons. You don't want to title it individually or in a trust. But in that case, you got to think about, okay, that's the owner. That's the entity that owns the property. So that's who's due the proceeds. Same thing you got to think about if there's a power of attorney. And if it's husband and wife typically that are the owners and the husband signing or the wife is signing to the other spouse, it's less of a problem for proceeds because typically it's going to, a lot of times it's going to count. And even when it's not, as long as there's not a divorce or anything, it's fine if the proceeds go to one account or the other. If they have separate accounts, that's fine. But with a power of attorney, what you got to think about, and we've had this come up, is if the husband is signing on behalf of the wife is not there, and the husband is trying to put it into his individual account, you have to confirm that the wife at that point is okay with the proceeds going to only his account. And again, typically, as long as there's not a divorce or separation or anything, that's not an issue. But you gotta be aware of that because otherwise, think about if it's a father and a daughter that are holding title and one is signing POA for the other. Chances are they may not have a joint account. So you have to make sure that that person understands, I'm not there to sign the document, but am I approving the proceeds go to the other person and I'm not getting any in my account. So that's just kind of something, and that's not really something y'all have to bring up to your client. We're the ones that are going to handle that. But if they mention something about that, you may just want to just say something or tell them to give us a call just to discuss so that there's no surprises at closing. That's what we're trying to avoid. If you hear something, even if it's something you think, okay, yeah, that's pretty standard, just give us a call and we'll say, yeah, that's not a big deal. Or yes, I'll give your client a call and I'll walk them through the reasoning behind it. Another one again is maybe a trust. If someone is the beneficiary of the trust, they say, oh, well, I'm the beneficiary anyway, so I'll go ahead and have the proceeds go to my account. It's got to go to the trust. It still has to be dispersed from the trust after the trust receives the proceeds. Do you have any questions on that? I get a lot of questions on that, so I like to go over that. Cheryl, if you have any questions, just pop in as well. But those are a lot of big things that we'll see come up at closing for proceeds and whatnot. Another thing that I want to flag for the seller side that I see come up a lot at closing is if there's an HOA or a water bills are huge. This happens all the time.
Yeah.
It'll show up on our title. And so it'll say $25 is due at closing. We of course have to collect that. Any money that are due, we have to have that collected so that it's released. I have sellers all the time that will go ahead and pay the overdue or the late water bill. At that point, once you're under contract, once we pull title and closing a few weeks away, tell them just to wait at that point because we will collect it anyway. What typically happens though on our side, and if y'all ever had this at closing, you'll know what I'm talking about, but they'll say, oh, I already paid that as we're going through the settlement statement.
Right.
And then they say, I don't want to pay it twice, I've already paid it. At that point, it takes a lot longer to make sure, we've then got to request a new water bill from the county. And at that point, we can't just, even if your client's the most honest person, we can't just take their word for it.
Sure.
We have to confirm, so we have to leave it on the settlement statement. Typically, what I've done is just hold the check, once it clears and we can see from the county that it's been paid, so we would just reimburse the seller back that amount. But a lot of times, it holds up closing because they say, oh, hold on, here's where I paid it on this date. It's typically like 3 days before closing or something like that.
Sure, yeah.
Just make sure they know, just don't pay that at that point.
So if you're like at 10 days or 10 days out, it's best not to,
Just don't pay it.
because you're gonna collect it anyways.
We're gonna collect it anyways.
Okay.
And if they have any questions on that, just tell them to send us an email, because we're gonna typically have already pulled the bill, it's already gonna be on the settlement statement for closing. And that's another thing, once we send out the draft settlement statement to you prior to closing, that's the kind of stuff to point out to your seller. So if they say, oh, I've already paid that, go ahead and let us know, so we can start requesting from the county the water bill, so that if they've already cleared it, it does take them a couple of days. Once the client pays it, it doesn't show up right away, where we can pull it and it necessarily shows it's zero balance. Go ahead and let us know that, so we can try to work with the county, get something in writing.
There was a closing I had one time and at the last minute he paid it, last minute meaning 2 or 3 days before the closing. But he did bring a receipt from the county to the table and then they were able to kind of.
Yeah, and a receipt or something in writing is gonna be what we'll need.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, if the county can get that over to us, it's not a big problem, we can go ahead and get that removed. Another one that's along the same lines is HOA. And HOA can actually be harder than sometimes even getting the water bills from the county, because if you have to go through, some of them have portals that we have to order through, and it will charge you for any extra, letter that you're ordering. Some of them you get updates and it's no charge. But of course, if your seller has, let's say, $100 unpaid balance or overdue fees or whatnot, let's say it costs $150 to order an update. They're gonna be at a loss for that, even though they paid it, because we still have to show that it's at a zero balance. So at that point, it's in their best interest, just go ahead and leave it unpaid, we're gonna collect it anyway. But that way we're not sitting there trying to go back and forth with the HOA, or if we have to collect it and submit it to the HOA, then your seller is gonna be having to deal with it after the fact, get reimbursed, and that's just dealing with HOAs for the most part. Some of them are great, but some of them it takes forever to get a response.
Sure.
So you don't want them to have to deal with that after the fact. You want it just to be totally done, they parted ways, and they don't have to worry about anything after closing, trying to get reimbursed. With that said though, for mortgage payoffs, make sure you're telling them, keep on paying, keep paying that. Because ultimately with the payoff statement, I'm gonna show you all over here. With a payoff statement, you don't want them, let's say their closing is on the third, and they haven't made their payment. I've had people say, well, the late fee isn't incurred until the 15th, so I'm just not gonna make my payment. Do not do that. Do not do that. Any overage support that we're collecting from the payoff is gonna be reimbursed to them once it's released. They would get anything in their escrows, any extra interest, anything like that. The last thing that you wanna happen is closing is then pushed, and then their payment doesn't get through on time, and then they have a late fee, and then there's a whole snowball effect of things that can happen.
Right.
But people do say, oh, I'm just not gonna make my payment, because closing is the state, and, payment is due on the date. No, go ahead and make the payment, keep it set up. What I would recommend doing is stopping the auto pay. stop the auto pay from happening, but then make that one-time payment. That if they want to do it direct deposit, that's totally fine. It typically takes, I think, 3 to 5 days to go through on that, but stop the auto pay. That's the only thing I would tell them to stop is auto pay.
Right.
Make sure they do that direct deposit still for the month that they're closed.
Yeah, for, I say, as an agent for the seller, you should tell them to stop the auto pay on the mortgage, on the home insurance, if it was monthly, on anything related to the house.
Yeah.
That is an auto pay, and because then they're gonna be overpaying, they'll get it back eventually, but still. They got moving expenses and all this kind of stuff, you know.
Yep, and another thing that they're gonna wanna make sure is any kind of services on the house. If they have a lawn service, just try to get them to go ahead and take a look at the month prior, see what all bills they had come out. Anything that was on auto pay, just go ahead and start getting that in your head. I know for my home, the seller forgot to cancel, it was pink and green, so it was the lawn, just make it look fresh. And they contacted us after the fact and said, oh, we forgot to pay it, but it was after closing, do you wanna just handle it? And we were like, no, that we don't want the service, you forgot to cancel it, I'm sorry. But that was your service, that's not ours. We weren't trying to be ugly or anything, but that's, you know, that's not our responsibility, we don't have to pay it. So you don't want your seller to have that, that was my point. So just make sure you tell them just to look at the month prior, get everything together, look at what your bills are, and then make sure you start canceling those.
I have a basic question. So the last closing, it just seems like we were right to the last minute trying to get the numbers for the lender. But what, in the best scenario, typical scenario, when do those numbers come in, and then when does the bill send it, get sent to the
3 days prior, anyway.
buyer? Yeah.
Yeah, so, and that's a tough one, because a lot, if numbers are coming in hot at the last second, you may not get it until the very last minute. But that said, though, the buyer's gonna have received the closing disclosure, with a good estimate of 3 days prior.
That count.
Yeah, so yeah, that's where, and it, I know for the lender side, and I would want, Matt to correct me on this, but as long as it's within a certain percentage from what they initially disclosed, I know numbers will of course change a little bit. As long as it's not changing whatever that percentage is, they can still move forward, even though that wasn't final number that's for everything. But it should be a pretty good ballpark for it. So
I just didn't get a lot of communication about that, like, I was like, trying to get the numbers, like, okay, where's the numbers, and I talked to the closing attorney, and they're like, well, the numbers keep changing, and I'm like, okay, but, just need something, like, or they could have just said, okay, it's gonna be close to this, and just send it to me, but we were like, the day before kind of thing.
But yeah, the question regarding that, so the closing disclosure that goes out 3 days prior, is that an estimate or is that pretty?
It's usually pretty close, because at that point, it can't change by like $30,000.
No, sure.
Redisclose. So it's gonna be
Upon
pretty.
us, here and there.
It's
Yeah,
typically
some
a
little
couple
bit.
$100. I have seen sometimes though where, a seller credit had been removed and the addendum didn't make it through until right before. So of course, then it has to go back through underwriting on the lender side.
Yeah.
So depending on what's changing, if it's thousands of dollars, it may have to be redisclosed and pushed to the courts. But typically I've seen that hundreds of dollars, maybe even a couple of thousand, depending on, what our loan amount is and everything. But, it depends is the answer. And I know that's not a great answer,
Yeah.
but it really is, you should have a pretty close number, but depending on if they're still balancing, I've had sometimes the numbers I get right before I walk into the
Right.
thing. So at that point, as long as they've had a good estimate on the numbers and they've been able to wire their funds, that's where that plays in, where that can create an issue, of course, if they didn't have the numbers and they weren't comfortable wiring.
Right, it was down in the wire of us.
Yeah.
No fun.
Yeah.
But, I just think there was, I don't know what was off about it.
Yeah.
It worried me.
Yeah.
But it all worked out.
That is not the norm. So it shouldn't be down to the wire every time. It should be pretty much a couple days before, at the very least the day before.
Yeah.
When you should see the numbers, because that way, especially as the realtor, you're gonna wanna make sure that you're reviewing that, if your conditions are correct on there. If there's any kind of invoices or repairs or any kind of stuff, that's your chance to vet and make sure everything is on there that you can tell. If you have any questions, of course, let us know, but that's your chance to review it, and review it with your client. The last thing you want is any surprises for them at closing. I know I had a closing last week, I felt terrible for this buyer. He didn't realize that his rate lock had expired. And so his interest rate was a whole lot higher than he thought it was gonna be. And I asked him, I said, when did you sign the closing disclosure? And he went back, he just didn't look at it close enough. And so he signed it, and so at that point, he wanted the home, so he continued signing, but it was a whole lot higher monthly payment than he planned.
Especially the last couple of weeks when it was really high.
Yeah, so, I mean, that was just an unfortunate situation. It kept getting pushed for whatever reason, but his rate lock was expired, and so he's signing through it. But that's your time to say, hey, if you're representing the buyer, hey, take a look at that closing disclosure. I know y'all typically don't see that unless the buyer reported it over to you, just to about their loan info. But
Right.
at that point, you can still walk through it and tell them, hey, on that first page, check the top right corner, it's gonna tell you if you have a conventional FHA, it's gonna tell you if you have a 30-year or 15-year, it's adjustable rate, check the right-hand corner. The top page has projected payments on it, and that's where it shows that interest rate. So if he had, taken a look at that top page a little closer, he would have had less surprises in closing.
And which document is it again, I'm sorry?
It's the first page of the closing disclosure.
Okay.
Yep. And the back pages of the closing disclosure have all the same numbers that are on the settlement statement. So it's just a different format because the lender, of course, is populating the closing disclosure to set the loan terms, and then we do the settlement statement, but it's the same numbers. As long as on the first page of that closing disclosure, the very bottom number, the cash to close, matches the settlement statement, it's just a different format, same numbers. But you can tell them, hey, grab that closing disclosure, take a look, top right corner, middle section shows the projected payments and interest rate, loan amount, all that good stuff. And then the closer to the bottom section is if they had any extras. Another common question that I get, so you may get it as well when you're going over numbers, especially with your buyer, they'll say, oh, I see 2 separate line items for my homeowner's insurance. That's normal. They have it in their extras, that's normal, because they're making that full year premium payment, and then you're also having the amount going into the extra. That is one of the most common questions
Right.
that I get.
Correct, yeah, that makes sense. That's if there's escrows.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
if there's no escrow, then it's just that one,
just the premium.
just the premium, yeah.
And then for cash closings too, just make sure that's not a requirement that we collect the homeowner's insurance at closing for a cash closing.
Right.
But of course, I don't want to have homeowners insurance. So they can either have it collected at closing, we submit the check, or they pay it prior, or after, but I would of course suggest prior to the closing. But just make sure, that they realize that it's not a requirement, but go ahead and get that in place, get it set up. You want the closing attorney take care of the bill. Go ahead.
Here's my thing about that, is if it's a cash closing, technically you represent the buyer at that point, right? And I guess you should have advised the buyer before the closing at some point, like get that homeowner's insurance.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're making this huge investment and,
Oh, yeah.
and I guess have it recorded on email or something that you did, because
Yes.
technically you represent them,
Yeah, anything like that, I would just put it in an email to them. That way they can't come back and say, oh, I didn't know. Well, it's a gentle reminder that, we did send that information.
Yeah.
And, same thing if it's in a flood zone or anything, just keep in mind flood insurance, get termite coverage, like all the different things that, and I would just start, if I was y'all, I would start a file and just have, these are the things when I'm representing a seller, these are the things when I'm representing a buyer to remind them of. And maybe you can come up with a format email, to send out when you represent the buyer versus seller. And that way you don't forget something, each closing is not, oh, did I send them this email, did I send them this? Get your bullet points together and make sure you have that ready to send them. And that's gonna show them you're prepared, you got their best interests. And of course, hopefully they'll refer you out to smart friends and family after that. But I.
Essentially at closing, because for warranties and termites, stuff like that, sometimes, especially with flood insurance, there's a 30-day waiting period, unless you buy it at closing.
Yeah.
If you buy it at closing, it starts immediately, but if you buy it a week after, that flood insurance, for example, or termite, something, they give you a 30-day waiting period, just in case you have something up your sleeve that, they don't know
When
about.
you do it closing, it's not different.
It's actually immediately, yeah, and do that closing, yeah, and some people don't quite get that,
Yeah.
And it's just, the insurance companies want to cover themselves. Why are you calling me a week later? Did you find something?
Right.
Yeah, something with the home warranties and stuff like that.
Yep, definitely get all the ducks in a row for that. Another thing that is good for, the closing, whether you represent the buyer or the seller, is, the wire instructions. Just keep in mind, and you'll already know this, if they mention to you that they bank with a credit unions take longer to submit wires. Typically, it can take more than a day. So if they have a credit union and they've mentioned that to you, tell them it is imperative that they send that wire the day before. And over wire, we do not keep the excess as a tip. We will reimburse back to the penny on the amount they've over wired to us, but they have to get that wire submitted. We do not have the money in, they will end up at closing signing a escrow agreement that they're closing in escrow, which means they do not officially own the property yet. They have a lender, some lenders will not allow you to close an escrow. Some builders, if they're buying new construction, do not allow you to close an escrow. If they want it to be the day of signing, everything must be completed, it must be officially closed. And of course, in order to officially close, you have to have the money.
Yeah, regarding that, is it possible that if you find out across the table that it's $600 short, something like that, can you run it back, get your steers check real fast and bring it? I mean, is that
Yeah.
a keyword for that?
So we have, a $1,000 limit is our total, so they wire their amount and there's $600 short, we'll be happy to take a check for that. $1,000 is our cutoff.
Okay.
With that said, if it's closed, or if it's one of your clients, and if it's someone that we are able to make a call for and say, okay, we'll take a little bit more than that, I'll typically have to just make a quick call to one of the partners to get it approved. And we typically at that point, just so you know where we're going with it, we have to make sure when we accept that check that it's not going to be, and not that we wouldn't trust your client, but they can also cancel the check, they can, there's ways for them to write it and then it hit our account and pull
No,
the account. So
That's why I was sending it to the bank, getting a shift check. That way you
cash
get it.
check
Yeah.
is the best route in that
Yeah.
situation, but a lot of times if they have
Takes
their
time.
checkbook, we'll still do it first.
Okay, gotcha.
You just want to take a look at their loan application, and what we can do with the loan application is we can actually take a look at. Those figures would be when they initially applied for the loan, so the loan application at closing is usually outdated, and that's fine. Because it was what the lender used to make sure that they were qualified.
Right.
So any like outstanding credit cards or mortgage payoff amount, like those numbers will be different. It's usually from like a month or two before.
Okay.
But we'll take a look, see what they've had in their account, so that all that information is on there. So we'll take a look, see what amount they had in those accounts, and I can take a look at the check, see which account it's pulling from.
Yeah.
And also look at the wire amount. So we'll just subtract it out, and as long as there's a comfortable balance there, we'll typically, one of the partners will usually approve it. $1,000 is your typical, just tell them that. And yeah, if it's a little bit more or less, don't sweat too much, just give us a call. And as long as everything looks fine and it's not like, oh, they'll have $1 less in that account or something, then we typically are okay, just keep it close to that 1,000.
And regarding closings again, it's a question I've always had, and for years I never really asked anything. You have a closing on what's today? Today's Wednesday? Okay, on Friday this week, right? Everything's going smoothly. Then at the last minute, something changes and you have to postpone it until Monday. Are you gonna be able usually to find, even though it's so close together from Wednesday to Monday, are you gonna be able to find a spot for that person on Monday? Or are you gonna tell them, oh, we're all full?
You mean for the calendar for scheduling?
Yes,
Yeah, well, don't worry about us not being able to schedule them in. We typically would, if we don't have enough attorney coverage, we hire contract attorneys to where we have coverage. So that's not ever a worry.
if something happens one extra day and say, oh, we're full that day.
No, we're not gonna, the only thing would be this particular office is full. There may be different locations, but for any closings with y'all, it's gonna most likely, unless I'm out for that day,
Yeah.
it's gonna be me closing them, and we actually offer to close them here. So that back conference room would be where we would sign, and it would be with me. So we'll make it work with your client at that point.
Yeah,
So don't stress about us not having covered. We'll definitely make sure they're covered. And most of their closing attorneys aren't gonna say, oh, sorry, we can't close you on Monday because we don't have a place on the calendar. They'll figure it out on schedule wise so that you don't have to stress about that. Another thing for your sellers to be aware of, for a wire transfer, and y'all may already know this. I'm gonna use Bank of America and Wells Fargo as an example. If you bank with them and you take a look at your check, that check, the routing number that's at the front of it,
It's
is
different.
not the wire
I
transfer,
know,
exactly. It's not the wire transfer number. That is the direct deposit or the ACH number. Those two have, I know those by heart, so I'm usually able to help them. But other banks, it may be the same thing. So that could be a potential delay with sending their proceeds, is if we don't have the correct number. We still have them go through that at closing. I'll usually repeat back the numbers to them to make sure it's correct. But if it's a bank I'm not super familiar with, I may not know that that's not the wire transfer number. So just tell them to give their bank a call ahead of time and just confirm that this is the wire transfer number. Another thing is if they bank with an international bank, they have to get a SWIFT code. So it's a lot harder with an international wire. Those aren't super common, but when they are, it can be a total headache, and those have been delayed days because they don't realize it's not the same wire transfer number. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. Any wire transfers, have them call the bank. If they've done it a million times and they know for sure, don't worry about it. But if they even question it a little bit, call and make sure. But that international.
I've heard that Wells Fargo is much, I'm sorry, the opposite, Bank of America is much easier, faster to do wires than Wells Fargo, is that true?
That is true. So,
Okay.
Bank of America, if you're submitting, I believe, up to 25,000, you can actually do that on your phone, on your computer, and you can do it, easily without having to go into a branch. Anything over that, and I believe it's 25,000 that the cutoff is. You can actually do that without having to go into a branch.
Okay.
The catch there is to make sure that they select, the wire transfer option, and the word is very confusing. There is something on there that says next day wire transfer, I believe, it's not. If there's not like a $20 or $30 fee, and I'm sure the client's not gonna love that, but if it's not a $20 or $30 fee, chances are it's an ACH transfer. And our bank has a block on ACH transfers, and most other law firms do as well, where that would actually not reach our account. It'll leave their account, so they're gonna say, oh no, it left my account, it's gone. It doesn't, it goes into middleman land basically, and it doesn't come to our account. So then at that point.
That's why it's the next day, not immediately, right?
Yeah, they would have to pull, their bank has to pull that amount back into their account for them to be able to then submit the wire transfer.
There's a big delay there.
Yes. Yeah, so make sure if they are banking with them, and they wanna do it online, they pick the option that has a fee. That's the best way to remember that, it's the option that has a fee. Sorry, there's a fee, but that's the wire transfer. But I have had people pick it, and I've seen the wording, and I can't remember exactly what it says, but it is very confusing. Cause you would think, okay, yes, next day transfer is free, and I think it even said wire transfer on there, but it's not, it's ACH.
And that's Bank of America, and Wells Fargo, what's the deal with Wells Fargo, it's such a big bank?
So Wells Fargo, I actually bank with them too.
Yeah.
They have a two-step process.
Yeah.
And Bank of America may have that as well, but they just have it more streamlined, to be honest, if they have this. But Wells Fargo has where, the first person that keys it in will have the wire set, but it's not actually released until a manager releases it. So they have a two-step process, but it's that second step that takes a while, because typically they do it at like 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock. They don't just sit there and do it as most one comes in, they do it in batches.
Oh, that makes sense.
So, and if they don't have, I guess, enough, they'll wait and do it later on in the day. But when that first person keys it, it's gonna show like pending deposit on their statement. So I have people in closing that say, oh, it shows pending from here.
Yeah,
It's, you gotta call. If we haven't received it, call them and say, I am sitting at the closing table. And I need that manager to do that second process. So, and I grilled Wells Fargo on that because I bank with them. So I know that one for sure. And I know a lot of other places, credit unions, like I said, those take a while to get the wire actually released. I know they have that two-factor, two-person step as well. So keep that in mind.
And, as
I
far
have
as.
a quick question.
Sorry, Cheryl, go ahead.
Sure.
No, go ahead. I'll wait. Okay, well, I had a quick question. I'm not sure if now is the best time for me to ask this question. It's kind of overall about what you've been talking about as far as the name on the deed and the account on if the house is sold, which account should the proceeds go in. So in this situation, if there's a house and it's in the father's name, the daughter is married, and she lives in a house and her husband pay the mortgage. But if they decide to get a divorce and they've been paying the mortgage, the daughter and the husband has been paying the mortgage. If they decide to get a divorce and the husband moves out of the house, what will happen as far as who is supposed to pay the mortgage or anything like that? And if the house is sold, the house is in the daughter's dad's name. If the house is sold, what will happen as far as like any proceeds? What name or whose name would those or whose account would the proceeds go into? Would it go into the daughter's account since she's been the one paying the mortgage, or would it go, the proceeds go into the dad's name because the house, his name is on the deed?
Always go by the owner of record. So it's gonna be, it would be the father. In that situation, it would be the father. My next question would be, do they have a lease with the daughter? Regardless, the proceeds would still, at closing, if the property sold, the proceeds would go to the father unless there's some other documentation in writing, stating the proceeds are, but at that point, it would still go to the father, and then he would potentially owe the daughter or the husband something once he receives proceeds. But from a title and from a closing standpoint, it's always going to be the owner of record who's due the proceeds. Sorry, Carol, I don't know where to look when you're to talk to. I think I'm supposed to look at that thing, but it's always going to be the owner of record. But my next question would be, do they have a lease or do they have something in writing?
No lease, nothing in writing. And if the house is sold, even though the dad hasn't been contributing any money, making payments, he would want something to go in his account. So if anything goes into his account, he's not giving anything to anybody.
Oh, wow. What is in his name though?
So yeah, that's a complicated one. But for a closing standpoint, it would be the father that's due the proceeds because he's the owner of record. Even though he hasn't been making any payments or anything, it's still
No
due to him.
payment.
Yeah, because Cheryl, think about this for a second too. He gets the benefits, but he's also, all this time, he's got the liability of the house too. It affects his record. If there's a lawsuit against the house, it was against him and not against the daughter, for example, because he's been the owner of record all this time. So
Yeah,
you get both.
if the daughter stopped making payments, it would be a foreclosure of his house, and that would affect his, correct, all the things for the foreclosure that would be affected with him, but yeah, it ultimately would go to the father.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know, we talked about this before, like, to make sure, so if I'm representing the buyer, how do they know for sure the borrowing instructions from you are, you're sending them like email,
Yes.
your link, how do they know?
Yeah, so in our buyer information form that we send out, it's actually got a secured link to our buyer instructions.
Okay.
Now, when I say that though, they are always welcome to give us a phone call. You'll have my direct cell phone. You have Emily's line as well. Call us and have them confirm as well. But they will receive those at the very beginning of closing, or the process, once they receive the information form, and most other law firms will do this as well. So I'd say that for us, but most others follow this.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. Yeah.
Right.
So they'll typically receive it at the very beginning, and then also once they receive the settlement statement, they'll receive that secured link again as well.
Okay.
And they receive them at the beginning, of course, in case we're the ones that are holding the earnest money, so that they can get that done, and complete their forms and earnest right away. But yeah, if they have any questions at any point, or they get any kind of weird looking email, let us know immediately, and just call either one of us and we'll confirm.
And I guess because wire fraud has been on the rise for a long time.
I mean, that's huge.
So how do you safeguard that? How do you try to make it the best?
Give them our direct emails and our team email, and if they see anything come from anybody else, let us know. That's the best route at that point, because there are so many different ways that people will try to intercept or try to get in, and we have a very secure system, most law firms do, actually all do, but those hackers, and they find a way, they find a way.
And the phishing emails have gotten really
Yeah,
impressive.
sure. You think it's them, yeah.
Yeah, so that, and Sometimes when you have somebody who doesn't pay that much attention.
Yeah.
It could be,
I guess you could call them and verify verbally, hey, I've got this number here.
right?
Yes, don't click on it, don't give us a call.
Yeah.
Y'all have our direct numbers, those are not gonna be changing, so just let them know this is a guaranteed contact to them. So just call them if you get anything questionable looking, and then for wire instructions, please call us. To verify. Morgan Blankenship is also on our team, she's another one that they see her name popping in, that is normal. But again, even if they're
For them again?
Morgan Blankenship
Okay.
works with us, pretty regularly on all the KW files. So she would be another name, but again, Amy, Emily, call us, just let us know, we'll be happy to check it out. I do want to show you all a couple of things just to also be aware of before you get to closing. And I kind of went over a little bit about this yesterday at the meeting. Sarah, let me know if you can see this stuff.
No, I cannot see. I was going to ask if you could share your screen so I can get your contact information as well.
Yes. And bear with me on this. See, share screen. There we go. Can you see now, Carol?
Yes.
Perfect. So on this, I'm not gonna run through this, but this is the settlement statement. So for this right here, if you're representing buyer, of course, run through this with them. I know I did a class a few months ago, running through a mock closing, just running through settlement statement, kind of telling you what everything was. If y'all have any questions, let me know, or if there's a big demand, I can do another one of those classes. But for y'all's purposes, typically on a settlement statement, you're gonna want to make sure to go to the last pages to confirm, not worth this. To confirm commissions are correct, and that's of course right here on this one. Make sure that is good to go. If you have a DA or a pay at close, make sure that is sent into us as soon as you receive it. So that way that is already inputted in our system. But the other section I want to check is miscellaneous right here. And that's gonna be on any closing attorney that you close with for settlement statements and have miscellaneous down there. That's where you're gonna want to check for repairs, invoices, all that kind of stuff, just to make sure we have everything on there. There's a last minute addendum or amendment. Please make sure that whatever was listed on that is on here. I can't tell you how many times it comes in the last minute for us. And then we have it, but it just doesn't get inputted. So just make sure you're checking that as well. The other documents I want to show y'all, and it's more for early on in the process. I talked about this yesterday, community association disclosure. Please emphasize this with your sellers especially. If any fees have changed, they need to make sure that they are contacting their HOA, get it in writing. Don't let them have a phone call to get the amounts. Have them get it in writing, in email, in a text message. I don't care how they get it in writing. Make sure they get that in writing from their HOA on initiation fees, any kind of transfer fees, because if they do not disclose that, if I can go down, I'm so bad. So I'm trying to, there we go. Okay, this one went a little better than the settlement statement. But right here, this section is what you're gonna want to show to them. And I'm gonna talk about the special assessments as well. These two sections right here are what you want to focus on with them, because if they don't disclose it, it would typically be a buyer fee for initiation, but if it's not disclosed here to the buyer, it is a seller fee. And I had a closing last week actually, where they had to disclose $600, I think it was $600, where the initiation fee was $1,000, and the seller had to pay the excess amount that was not disclosed. They of course were not very happy. They wanted it as part of their closing cost credit that they gave. Not do that as well. All the wording is in these two sections right here. That includes new account setup fees. You'll see that right in here. Anything that's a fee that would normally be the buyer's, if it's not disclosed, it's been the seller's responsibility. And there's nothing we can do about that. It's listed on the HOA letter, and we have to pull whatever is listed on the HOA letter and put it on the settlement statement.
And it can be corrected 5 days prior to closing or week before closing.
And, but the catch at that point is that you would need basically an amendment to say that they agree that these fees were not disclosed, where the buyer would then be taking over responsibility.
Because isn't it when it goes under contract, that
Whatever
that's
fee-
it? Right.
Yeah, if they do not sign an amendment agreeing that this is the updated, these are what the fees are, and buyer is gonna be paying those, after they've gone under contract and they've already disclosed on the CAD, it's not gonna be about, it wouldn't be a buyer fee, it's still your seller's fee. So that's
Oh,
why
really?
it's super important, and a lot of times at that point, let's say that happened and you submit as the listing agent, let's say you submit the amendment that says these are the fees. The buyer's agent doesn't have to sign that, because they're gonna realize, okay, right now the seller's trying to not have to pay that, or they want the buyer to pay it, but that
Yeah.
buyer's agent's probably gonna say no.
That's why it's due, I think today after binding, I think 48 hours after binding, I think, something like that.
believe So, I know it's pretty close. But I would just have them, right when you get the listing, go ahead and contact the HOA, so that way you don't have to, it's already completed, they know what all the information is. I would go ahead and just have that information done, so it's already taken place. Typically, I think your chances of getting the buyer to sign that amendment are pretty slim. Especially if their agent, yeah, especially if their agent knows that it would go then.
Yeah, unless it creates another argument and the buyer wants the house really bad and it's okay, I'll pay whatever, $400 over here.
I mean, I've seen all situations, but I would just, don't even get to that.
No, sure,
Just have them,
yeah.
have them complete it. Another thing I want to talk about is special assessments right here. This will get people as well. So of course, if the assessment is already in place, it's already disclosed, this amount's gonna be due. The seller must disclose that upcoming assessment. It's already been voted on and passed. That must be disclosed to the buyer. The one that caught people is right here, 4A, under consideration. So under consideration, with reference to a special assessment shall mean that a notice of a meeting at which a special assessment will be voted on has been sent to the members. So at that point, if that meeting is during your time that you're under contract, basically, that buyer must know that that meeting is taking place to where a special assessment could be voted on. Does that make sense? So they have to be aware of that. We've had one where the seller did not disclose that there wasn't a special assessment that was pending, but there was under consideration, and the seller did not
So
disclose.
how do you handle that? Do you provide a letter or you?
Yeah, you just have to put it in writing and let them know that the HOA has, at that point, I would just send out the notice that the HOA gave. That's gonna be your best bet. Send that over to them and let them know.
If they don't have it, just contact the HOA and get it all ready, I guess.
Yeah, everything you get in writing from them, but just let them know, this is what my client received from the HOA. There's an upcoming, meeting where there's gonna be a vote on it, and that has to be disclosed over to the buyer. If it's not, then there's seller's responsibility.
So so that would just go. And just, how would you?
So at that point, there's gonna be a space up here,
So you could just go ahead and put them in, because if it doesn't turn out that they do it, then it's fine.
and it's totally fine.
Yeah.
You just have to disclose it, but right here,
Just disclose it,
Yeah.
like it's gonna happen.
yeah, exactly.
Got
So right here, here's the part for total portion under consideration, that's
it.
okay.
Okay, okay.
And you can also make a note
Oh,
here,
it says under consideration. I got it.
yeah,
But you don't know the amount yet, or do you?
at that point, you may or you may not, but
Yeah.
they still have to know that there's a meeting, even if there's not an amount yet.
Okay,
Let's say that most will tell you, like, this is,
we're considering $900 bucks.
Yeah.
Okay,
they'll
Yeah.
typically know what it is, but let's say they don't, just let them know there is one pending.
yeah,
And then at that point, I would just send straight over what you have from the HOA. Say, here's what we've received. The meeting is on X date, but make sure you fill that out because we have had it before, it was not. And that will survive closing. You can see that
That would
now.
be a lot of money.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah. So right here. Warranty shall survive closing. So it's not like they say, oh, tough, you didn't know about it,
Close,
provide,
yeah.
like, hands it, no, that's still gonna be a responsibility of your client. So that would not be a big day, you found that out at the last minute. But just make sure that they read this, and ultimately, again, the big picture, get it in writing from the HOA and have that happen. Another thing for your seller, a lot of this, you're more for really the seller side. Instructions to closing attorney, of course, get that to us as quickly as possible. So at that point, we're gonna make sure if we have a DA or a case closed that it matches with what we've got here. I'm not telling you to do this, but if you do give a credit or any kind of thing like that, or if you're paying something from your commission out of your commission, you're paying anything from it, we'll need, first of all, a letter signed by the broker, gets it signed by one of our office staff here at KW, but also it needs to be right here in this section. On the back page of that, instructions of closing attorney, typically we're gonna want to see how much is being deducted from that as well.
So if I were to pay, clients appraisal or something, then I need to get them to sign off on that.
But hopefully, yeah, just if it's being deducted from that on the settlement statement, if you're paying it outside of that and you're still receiving the full commission on the settlement statement, we don't need it at that point.
Okay.
But if it's coming from the commission and basically anything, if you're getting 3%, if you're receiving that check or Keller Williams is receiving that full 3%, that's fine. But if it's to be deducted from that, that's when we.
And then how do we get approval for that?
You'll want to get approval from, I think it's Linvest for that. I think is where you'll
She will just send a.
something like a DA or a pay closer, maybe Ken actually does it. I just-
I think
I think both of them.
Let them know.
Yeah, I would reach out to them and say, hey, for this closing, I'm paying this out of my commission, I'm gonna need it for
Pretty simple.
close.
Don't know
And
what's
they'll handle that for you. But it also needs to be reflected here as well for us.
Okay.
And then for a payoff, last thing, I know we're right at 11, for a payoff. This is a very common question that I get from sellers at the closing too, and y'all may already know this, but typically they're gonna say, all right, I see the number that's on the settlement statement, it's a whole lot higher than my last statement that I received. It's gonna be, there's gonna be fees in here that add up to where that's what we're pulling for. So this was my closing from desk when I moved, I didn't have a big one to go with, so I'm pulling mine. But we closed on September 29th, and this one, for whatever reason, was through October 23rd. But basically, when we got the total payoff, this of course was a whole lot higher than our previous statement. It's because there's a bunch of different fees on here. There's an unpaid late charge, it's got accrued interest, but basically this was probably what my statement said on the last one that I received, but look at that total amount for the payoff. So it's a lot
Can't
higher.
tell. Is it, how much higher?
It's about 2,500 higher. I would
Really?
say. Yeah, but it's the different interest that has to be collected, just to make sure, so when we actually wire, so we would have wired this payoff to Freedom Mortgage, and then they collect it, once they receive it, they'll populate that quitclaim deed or the release of the security deed or the cancellation, whatever, different places call it different things, but it's ultimately the same thing, it's saying paid off. Once they get that prepared, they would have cut back the difference to me, that they have to have that excess amount. But a lot of people do not realize that this accrued interest right here, mortgages are paid in arrears.
Right.
On it, so
Right,
the interest part is different, so what's reflected on their statement is not gonna be what's on their.
correct.
So just let them know that, because that is another really common question that I get
Yeah.
closing, is they pull this out, and then I have to pull, or they pull their statement, and I pull the payoff, and then I show them, we didn't just come up with this number, this is where we're getting that.
And that's why actually the client himself, the seller can call his own mortgage company and request a payoff. And they'll give you a payoff to an amount, to a date.
Right.
Yeah, it's through July 10th, or, this is, July 12th today, yeah, they're good.
Yeah, and that good through date, we typically will at least do a week. I don't know why we did like a month for mine, but at that point, at least we have a week, we'll collect that extra interest and then we're good to go for releasing that. Y'all have any questions on that? I have a bunch more tips, so y'all can always ask me anything at any point. But
So question, okay, when you contact the HOA letter, is it a standard format? Is it just whatever they?
it depends on the HOA company. A lot of them is the same format. I know like condo certs is one that we go through,
Homeowner led one, then
if it's,
you can get whatever, okay.
yeah, at that point, if it's homeowner led, they typically have the same format.
Okay,
But it's just whatever they need on.
okay, there's no official whatever, yeah.
No, there's not like a standard. I know Florida has, it's actually one of their statutes where it's gotta be the same exact format for any HOA for the state of Florida. Georgia doesn't have that, so
Okay,
they do look different, but they all won't have the same stuff on them.
okay,
But if there's any questions, of course, like to the HOA, just you can call them, right? Because HOAs, I've had people call them on the phone, they'll call them one thing and then they can't remember who they talked to, but the person said it was this amount and then it only matters what's on that letter. Okay, so.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of stuff that comes up as deals come on.
Yeah, that's why like I don't have that. I don't have that. Yeah, not yet, but soon.
Well, HOA ones can definitely be tricky, so just make sure you tell them if they have an HOA, just
Yeah,
don't, if you have
that's actually
any.
my neighbor.
Well, yeah,
Thankfully, so it is like, yeah, so I'm kind of connected to the.
well, that'll actually help you out then.
Yes, yeah, it did help communication a little better.
Is it good practice to overstate what the HOA fees may be and the actual initiation fee and stuff like that?
To overestimate on them,
Yeah,
you would rather, of course, overestimate than
then
underestimate.
under, right?
Yes, I would always recommend overestimating, but I would even more recommend just getting the exact fees from the HOA. Because at that point, if they don't tell, if your client is asking the HOA for what the fees are, and then it's something different on the actual HOA letter, they can actually.
Finish it.
They have a class.
You
Okay,
can stay, we just need to finish the Zoom.
okay.
Gotcha. But yes, they can.
Thanks for answering that.
Yeah, very helpful.
Cheryl, thanks for joining us. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Cheryl. Oh, and
Thank you
Kurt.
so much. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.